Actually, in where I work at the moment, I've got a few Canadian folks, and they actually told me that because they've lived in Fano probably like a few months now, they say that Canada and Australia are very similar in terms of the type of cities, the city life, and also where you can go sightseeing. Even like the landscape of Canada and Australia are similar. Yeah, I've heard that, and like a lot of hiking spots and all that in Australia, it's, around Sydney in particular, it's really common. But the biggest difference, they said, like the biggest difference they said is that Canada's insanely cold and the weather's like a bit messed up, and Australia's like a lot better. So I think we have one up on you.
I can imagine. Yeah. But you also have more deathly creatures that are out to like kill you every time you walk out the door.
No, I'm pretty sure that's just a stereotype. There's none of that in the city if you come to Sydney. Oh, maybe here and there, but it's not really a threat to your everyday life sort of thing.
I think just like, the white folks who say that, Islam is terrorism and whatnot. It's like the same kind of stereotype when they say that.
Yeah, I think in Western countries, like the discrimination you face there would be the same here. Like as in, it's not too much better or worse for Muslims. But I think the Muslim culture there would be quite a bit more developed, wouldn't you think? Like in terms of population, as in, is it easy to get halal food and stuff around where you live?
It really depends on where you are. In the big cities, yes. Where I live, for example, I live on an island on the west coast of Canada. So we have one masjid in the city that my father established actually many, many years ago. And we have about maybe 5 halal food places, and there's always 1 or 2 that are just shutting down because it's hard to maintain. Is like our community is relatively small. If you go to the mainland, if you go to big cities like Toronto, pretty much anywhere in Ontario, there's much larger communities, and it really depends. I feel personally, just from when I've been to the States and I've been to certain other areas, I feel like everywhere else, the Muslim culture is far more developed than it is where I live in particular. But like I said, where I live is very, very small.
Yeah, because it feels like for us you'd be living in like a rural area sort of thing, sort of apart from the city. Because the image we get of Canada is that it's very sort of multicultural, metropolitan, as in there's a lot of
major cities like Vancouver, Toronto.
Yeah, a lot of Sikh people, as in a lot of sort of immigrants in general. Like a lot more vibrant than we would have it.
Just Rain's pretty big here. He's pretty popular.
Yeah, have you heard of Just Rain? He's like a comedian.
I have.
He's massive over here, so I'm guessing in Canada he's 10 times as big.
That's pretty funny.
Yeah.
He is pretty well known, obviously, amongst the South Asian community in particular.
Yeah, South Asian. So we're both of South Asian background here, so we see a lot of that. But we had another guest on earlier on during our podcast. Have you heard of Dr. Mohammed Yilan? He talks about he's a biologist.
Yes.
Yes. So we've had him on, and he said that he actually said that he enjoys Australia better in terms of the interaction with people. He used to live here in my city, actually. Yeah. So I guess you would know him pretty well.
Somewhat.
But yeah, he said he said that Australia, the people were nicer than in Canada, which sort of like was a bit of a surprise to us because we assumed Canadian people and sort of
like general population or Muslims.
General population he's talking about.
Interesting. I don't know. I find that most of the people here are, for the most part, I find them very easygoing and very easy to deal with. Obviously, you deal with, as a Muslim in particular, you face certain challenges and the usual kind of run-of-the-mill racism. But I feel overall it's less than we would expect from other areas.
You mentioned about halal food. It was funny because my uncle, so my dad's brother, he was in Australia for like a month or so. Long story as well. Josh somehow knows him through his dad, and they know each other. But anyway, so he actually lived in Australia for a bit. He lived in Canada, but he lives in New York at the moment. Oh, he lives in Texas, sorry, but he lived in New York. So he has the whole grasp of all these places. And he mentioned specifically about halal food. He said, I don't know about Canada in particular, but you mentioned it's hard to maintain and stuff. But he said even in New York, for example, and even some places where halal food is actually like a problem. And subhanAllah, like me growing up in Sydney, I've never had this issue, because literally you walk out, literally 5 minutes down from my house is a halal McDonald's, sorry. I think Macca's is a slang Australian use.
Not sure if it's only Australian.
And then another 15 minutes drive is another halal McDonald's at they call it Bankstown here. So it's literally, and there's like halal butcheries like literally flooded in my area that I live. It's very there's a strong kind of Muslim community, and there's also pockets of that throughout Sydney. So it's not just based where I live. So it's funny how even like this Burger King, halal Burger King, basically, or Hungry Jack's, we call it here in Australia. So many halal foods like Nando's or Porto and stuff. So like we never have this issue, right? But then my uncle was talking about how it's actually a big issue back there. So I'm just like, where's the business owners at? Like this is like a market to tap into, and they'll be like making the big bucks. I don't know. So is it really a big issue, you reckon?
It is. The problem is Muslims are cheap, and they don't want to pay for quality food from other Muslims, and provide quality halal food for other Muslims. So you have your obligatory shawarma place, and you have your obligatory halal pizza place. And yeah, that's pretty much it. And then if you're lucky, you have a halal Indian place. And yeah, that's pretty much it.
Yes, I think before kind of talking, we should intro you. Our guest today is a Salafi Feminist, aka Zainab bint Yunus. Actually, sorry, I think I should have said it the other way around. Zainab bint Yunus, aka the Salafi Feminist. So she's a Canadian Muslim woman who has been active in grassroots dawah and writing about Islam and the Ummah for the last 10 years. Her main focus is on gender relations, Muslim women in the Islamic history, and combating misogyny in Muslim communities. She can be found posting regularly on a Facebook page, The Salafi Feminist, and her blog, thesalafifeminist.blogspot.com. And we'll provide all the links in our show notes, inshallah. So yeah, assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah.
What I wanted to ask you, actually, I wanted to say that we've heard of you being like in the kind of Facebook world for quite a while. Actually, we've heard of you, and we actually follow you, and you kind of brought that different edge or kind of different perspective of how we should view things, I guess, in regards to Muslim issues. Do you feel like that was why you kind of started a Facebook page in the first place, that you wanted to get kind of a different perspective of the Muslim community, for example?
Well, for myself, I've been on the internet for a while, since I was a teenager. So I originally started blogging just way back. And I was, like I said, a teenager. I was about 15, 16 when I first started. And then alhamdulillah, I had the opportunity to be a founding co-founder of MuslimMatters.org and a writer for them quite regularly.
Oh, really?
Are you? I didn't even know that.
We didn't know that. So you're one of the original people that started up Muslim Matters.
I was.
Oh, wow.
Ahmad Sheikh was the one who came up with the brilliant idea to begin Muslim Matters, and he contacted a bunch of us writers, and I was like, "Hey, want to join?" And I was like, "Yeah, let's do it." And of course, like I said, there were many others involved as well. But that's really where I kind of got out there on the internet. Prior to that, I wrote for like my local Muslim community newspaper. And yeah, so Muslim Matters was the first platform that I truly wrote for, and then I left them after a few years. I moved on to writing for a Sisters magazine, which was also a fantastic opportunity, mashallah. I really enjoyed my time with them, benefited a lot from them, gained a lot of experience with them. And after that, I ended up kind of just on Facebook, really.
Did you find that Facebook gave you your biggest reach in terms of like disseminating or like talking about and having conversations on the topics you wanted to?
Was never, for me initially, the intent was never to go out there and make a change per se, or to have the special platform. But I found myself consistently drawn back to certain issues over and over again. And I would write things and I rant a lot. And I was like, okay, well, I publish this as an actual article on any given website. But I know there's like a handful of people who used to read my stuff. Maybe they'll still read it. And then I began my Facebook page, and I was just like, I'm going to reinvent my old blog self under a new name and just kind of throw out my thoughts. And I consider it like screaming into the void, basically.
Interesting. Well, it's definitely not a void because like you're reaching us in Australia as young sort of MSA boys going through university.
Alhamdulillah.
As in, your ideas definitely have that impact. As in, it reaches further than you would think.
Alhamdulillah, I'm always surprised to hear that and glad to hear it at the same time, and a little bit nervous because a lot of the times I just say what is on my mind. Things like I said that impact me very personally. The things that I talk about, the things that I write about, the things that I am consistently drawn to tend to be matters that revolve around da'wah, around women's experience, Muslim women's experiences within primarily a conservative Muslim bubble. And I know it's very much a bubble because a lot of people will be like, well, I don't have this experience or whatever. But you know what? I also know a lot of people have had this experience. And Muslim women around the world have confided in me that they've shared these different experiences. And so it's really just a matter of I I don't like to take the liberal progressive approach of, questioning the Quran and Sunnah in the sense of denying the perfection of the Quran or denying authentic ahadith. Like that's something where obviously I draw a hard line. And for me, it's very much a matter of balancing and maintaining dedication to the Quran and Sunnah while being very cognizant of the fact that the way the Quran and Sunnah have been taught to us, primarily as Muslim women, as the audience who is taught about what it means to be a Muslim woman, the ideal Muslimah trope, as it were, how it has affected us, whether the things that we have been taught, whether deliberately or unconsciously, implicitly or explicitly, how that has affected us, how it has affected our perception of Islam, our identity as Muslim women, what it means to be a Muslim woman, how we operate within our communities, within our families, how we deal with our spouses, how we deal with our children, how we deal with people out in the workplace, how we deal with those in the masajid, our access to masajid, our access to scholarship. Female scholarship, does it exist? Where does it exist? How does it exist? Where can we find female scholarship? Who can we turn to? And this is all, like I said, within a very conservative Muslim bubble because I really don't like wading into the whole liberal, progressive Muslim feminist scene per se. Like Amina Wadud, for example. You think Muslim feminism and everybody says like, oh, so you're an Amina Wadud follower. No, absolutely not. I actually have had huge issues with her, and I am not ashamed or abashed to say that I find her entire stance absolutely unacceptable. And so this is why I have my pen name, the Salafi Feminist, which sounds ridiculous to a lot of people, and which I did initially choose kind of tongue in cheek.
That's what I wanted to ask you about, just the idea of what made you want to come up with the name or title, the Salafi Feminist, and what do you mean by Salafi and what do you mean by feminism? Because in Australia, okay, so from what I've gathered in America, because a lot of the da'i and dawah is there, it reaches all around the world. So there is a kind of difference between the whole divide between the Salafis and Sufis, for example. And however, I don't know about Canada, but in Australia or Sydney in particular, we don't have these issues per se. It's more just people are struggling with the Deen, and that's it. It's not really like, oh, there's a Sufi and there's a Salafi, and there is small kind of politicized Islam and then the Tabligis, but that's not really a major problem.
I reckon we have a bit of that Salafi Sufi sort of the combativeness between the two camps. We do have it, but the whole liberal progressive problems that you guys are sort of like drowned in the States and in Canada, we don't face nearly as much. But yeah, coming back to your name, so like I just wanted to say, like, it's funny you choose that name in particular because the two labels are sort of like mutually exclusive, a lot of Muslims would think, and they rile Muslims up in sort of opposing ways. If you say you're a Salafi, you sort of gain favor with one camp of Muslims, and they're like, oh yeah, she's on our side. But when they hear feminist, they're like, oh wait, she's definitely not from one of us.
She's a progressive and
exactly. So
like we should stay away from them and keep our eye out for them. So yeah, well, how do you what made you come up with those terms, and what do you mean by both terms, Salafi and feminism?
So initially, like I said, it was a little bit tongue-in-cheek. I was thinking of a new pen name because the one that I had way back when I first started was kind of silly, kind of immature. I mean, I was a kid back then, so I used to go by Anonymous. And then after I joined Muslim Matters, they were like, okay, you kind of have to have a more grown-up name.
Yeah, that's your Twitter handle. I noticed that. I thought it was like a fake account. Like, wait, who am I talking? Like, am I talking to the legit person?
Yeah.
But
I
yeah,
didn't change that. But after I left Muslim Ad, I was like, okay, I kind of need to have my own pen name. And I don't just like going by my own name. But it came about as part of conversations that I had with other people, often on these topics of gender relations and understanding gender roles in Islam and so on and so forth. And those who are more liberal / progressive would be like, you're so Salafi. And I do have what you'd consider a Salafi Aqidah background, and even growing up.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
So even growing up, even though my family's never called themselves, identified themselves as Salafi or part of Salafiyah per se, but when I joined the internet world and I realized how people define these labels, I was like, oh, well, yeah, I guess I am. And within an Aqidah sense, most definitely.
So like I wanted to get in a bit deeper about that. So the term Salafi, do you imply by it like a general sense or impulse to move back to sort of emulating what the first Muslims did and in the correct sort of way?
Absolutely.
Or do you also mean it in the more stricter sense of you don't follow a particular madhab and you sort of like follow certain scholars? Is that it as well?
Yes, definitely. I definitely
Okay, so it's both for you. Yeah.
I very firmly believe when it comes to, like I said, my writing and the approach that I take and the way that I question things, I want to cut through all the baggage that we have as Muslims, whether it's cultural baggage, whether it's madhabi baggage, whether it's a combination of religious and cultural baggage, and question, is this really how Rasulullah and the Salaf and the Sahaba viewed women? Is this how they interacted with one another? Is this how they viewed the world? Is this how they conducted themselves? I want to get past so many of the things that we have internalized as being part of Islam when it may not necessarily be part of Islam per se.
And for you, like Salafi sort of the label Salafi sort of encapsulates that for you, being a part of your pen name.
Absolutely.
That's what you mean by it.
Yes.
And so then moving on to the feminist part, what do you mean by that exactly? Because then there's the whole other side to that. Like, are you adopting?
You can say like, the Sahaba didn't have these terms. They didn't go around saying, women's rights or feminism or use those terms. You know what I mean? So then, what do you mean by that?
So I use the term feminist relatively loosely. It's a way, I will admit, a little bit of shock value because it confuses people.
Yeah, it definitely has that effect. As in, your name is deliberately sort of made to sort of confuse and make people think you're in some sort of weird ideological approach. But I think, like, deep down, I knew you did it deliberately to get people riled up so they would listen to you. Not that they would listen to you, but that
it makes
see it as something different.
It's not
exactly
just to dismiss per se. Like I said, if you're a liberal, the term Salafi is gonna, make you uncomfortable. And if you're conservative, the term feminist is gonna make you uncomfortable. So I'm one of those people who wins the unpopularity contest, I suppose you could.
It's like those kind of clickbait YouTube videos that you see, those titles like, oh, I became an ex-Muslim or something, or I don't know, like those clickbaity titles that make you want to watch it. But then you actually listen to content like, it's like intellectual and stuff, it's like different. So it's kind of that adding that effect, I guess.
It's a little bit of everything, a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but a little bit dead serious at the same time, because I do identify, like I said, very strongly as Salafi in Aqidah, Salafi in the way that I want to approach the Deen, and like I said, particularly gender roles and so on and so forth. And I also identify as a feminist in the sense that my focus is very much on women and women's rights, on what we have gone through, what our experiences are, upholding our rights. And the term in general, my pen name in general, I feel encapsulates all of that. And it's very evident that I'm not what you would call, a secular feminist. I don't follow or uphold principles and ideals that most people ascribe to hardcore feminism.
So feminist for you stands for more a general sense of standing up for women's sort of issues and voicing your concerns against certain oppressions that happen.
Right, and reclaiming our status that Allah has given us in this Deen, and reclaiming our Shari'i rights, which have been denied to us for so long. And a lot of people will say very snidely, well, what rights do women not have today? And, women have this and that and the other. But it's about so much more than, I don't know, the right to vote, which, by the way,
Yeah, exactly.
is still in Muslim countries, all right, and still some places haven't had that yet, or only achieved them recently. And it irritates me very much when Muslims say things like, Islam gave women their rights 1400 years ago. Okay, sure, it really did. But guess what? Muslims have been taking them away from us. And we can't blame this on the kuffar. The kuffar are not responsible for what goes on in our masajid. The kuffar are not responsible for the cultural mentalities that we have, that we perpetuate, that are ingrained in us. They're not responsible for that. We are. And I believe that we need to get past the victim blaming, the blaming of colonialism, the blaming of kafir ideologies when it comes to, questioning the status of Muslim women today in our communities. And note, I don't say the status of women in Islam, because that I'm very aware of. And it is that status which I want to reclaim for ourselves and to emphasize. Because we are so caught up in uttering these platitudes about Muslim women's rights, but we are not equally invested in putting that same amount of effort into actually addressing the issues that we do have in the Muslim community. Major things like domestic violence, like women's right to khula, like child custody cases, like...
Yeah, you've posted about that recently. I remember reading. Yeah.
Yeah, and these are things that, like I said, Muslim women experience every single day, born Muslim or convert. We experience these things. And we have tried for so long to live within the cultural constraints that are demanded of us, to live within the allegedly religious constraints that have been projected onto us, but that actually go against the Sharia in many ways. For example, people who deny women khula, even in cases of abuse. People who deny women khula for, really any reason. Women have been told over and over again, sister, be patient. Sister, what are you complaining about? At least he doesn't beat you. Or if he does beat you, well, you know what? You don't have any broken bones yet. Or if you have, well, you know what? Think of the children. All these excuses. And this is,
Yeah.
I could go on and on and on, but there are so many issues that we deny. And what really upsets me and bothers me the most is that conservative Muslims in particular, we are so invested, like I said, in trying to combat quote-unquote feminism, secular feminism in particular, that we refuse to acknowledge the very serious issues of misogyny and sexism that we have in our communities. And it is that denial, and it is that absolute refusal to face those issues and to address those issues the way that they should be, that I believe actually pushes women away from Islam and further towards secularism and towards abandoning Islam completely.
Yeah, definitely. So you would say here that this sort of reaction against secular feminism, as you're saying, by conservative Muslims, that sort of overrides the real concern of like problems we do have?
Yeah, absolutely.
Is that what you're sort of saying?
Yes, for sure. And I don't deny that there are really serious issues with secularism and Muslims being attracted to secularism in general. Certainly those things exist. And when it comes to political posts, for example, I very much identify with the conservative stances on, like I said, Aqidah, like the whole Stephen Hawking debacle, where we've got Muslims trying to claim Jannah. I'm like, come on, the dude's an atheist. It goes against like the very fundamental belief of Islam itself. Here's Tawheed on one hand, here's atheism on the other, and how are you trying to convince anyone that, well, he was a really smart person, so he should go to Jannah? What? Anyways, that's a tangent.
Yeah, like I know, like a lot of people kind of posting it on and sharing on the Facebook, like, "Oh, rest in peace" and all that. Like me, I just took like the back fence on that, because even like Muslims doing that, it's like, okay, I understand in his field he might have achieved a lot. Like that's his field. He was a master in whatever field he was doing, and cosmology and whatnot. But at the same time, it's like if you look at it from a theological point of view, right? He's apparent, like from what you've kind of observed, he was, an enemy of Allah, like, straight out, right? Like his antics,
How ironic is it that Iblis, the one that we call Ar-Rajim, the cursed, Iblis is smart enough to acknowledge Allah's existence, and he's still going to hell forever.
Yeah, if you
Yeah.
think of it like actually, I was on the way to before recording. I was actually listening to a small segment of someone talking about like story of Iblis and just the whole spiel of, because even Iblis, right, before he became shaitan, basically he would be worshipping so much that they even say that in every kind of part in the sky is Iblis's sajda, that he used to worship Allah that much, until obviously when he was told to prostrate to Adam, and arrogance and ego, and that actually was his downfall in terms of
Precisely.
disobeying Allah. The root of it was all ego and arrogance, and that's what you get from people like Stephen Hawkings, and you have other atheists out there spurring hatred of religion, right? So the whole foundation is some sort of ego, arrogance that they have against religion. And you can relate all those kind of stories to shaitan, and we can't at the same time with Stephen Hawking and what happened, I just feel like uncomfortable when people are they can applaud his achievements in the field of science, but in terms of talking about afterlife and all that, I was like I don't know, like it's not something that I want to like discuss about. But yeah,
I mean, honestly, I find that the biggest issue is that so many Muslims who should know better, like I said, the very foundation of our faith is Tawheed. That should be the one thing that we hold dearer to us than anything else. And the one thing that we should be defending with every breath in our body. We should not be defending kufr. We should not be defending those who spread kufr. We should not be, especially, trying to defend and promote those who not only disbelieved in Allah, but who deny His existence in the first place. And obviously, it's not the place of any one of us to say so and so specifically is going to hellfire. But I have noticed amongst Muslims there is a discomfort and even a rejection of the idea that the kuffar will go to Jahannam. And I just want to be like, I'm sorry, did you ever read Surah Al-Fatiha? Did you ever read the ayah fi nari Jahannam khalidina fiha? The non-Muslims will suffer in Jahannam for eternity. This is why we are Muslims. This is like the point of religion.
You mentioned about the struggles of Muslim women in general, and at the same time you mentioned that because that they're just told to put up with the struggles or hardships that they face. For example, he's beating you, so just get over it because for the sake of your children and whatnot. These things push women to secularism and liberalism, right? So
Absolutely.
what I want to hone in on is the exact struggles of Muslim women in the current day and age. Like, what kind of issues should the whole, let's just hypothetically say you have every Muslim, uncle, auntie, super conservative, not so conservative Muslims just sitting in, together. What's the kind of issues, the main issues that would you mention to them that the Muslim women are going through in particular in this current day and age, and what should we know about it?
So the first thing I would say, outside of extreme cases like domestic violence and so on, the main thing that starts is how we raise Muslim women from childhood into adulthood, and how we teach Muslim women to conceptualize their identity as Muslim women, and and what our role is within our community at large. So many of us are taught, like I said, implicitly or explicitly, that we are not meant to be fully functioning members of society. We are meant to be domesticated. We are meant to be quiet. Don't be too loud. Don't be too argumentative. Don't ask too many questions. That we belong behind, not just.
Do you feel like because do you think that this in particular what you're describing is particularly with for example conservative Muslim, or would you say on a more general Muslim community sense? Because for example, me personally, what I've observed, my mom or my sister, because I have a younger sister, and even people around us, I feel that Muslim women, maybe on a personal level, like we don't see back, I don't know, it's behind the scenes kind of thing, that they don't get as much of a say in the family dynamics. However, would you say that what you're describing, right? The issue could be particularly, I don't know, for Arab community, or it's not the same with the
No,
subcontinental communities,
I think
or is it with a general
it's
sense?
no, it's definitely within a general sense because it happens amongst Arabs, it
Yeah.
happens amongst Desis, it happens amongst those from totally different communities. It's very much, I would say it's global, but in differing ways, and it manifests differently. So even though, mashallah, we are seeing incredible numbers of Muslim women who are going out there and they are being professional and they're like achieving great careers and great educations, but all this baggage is still there. The very subtle ways that we as women are raised and taught is very different. And it's sometimes it's hard to articulate the exact ways to somebody who is not female themselves and haven't been raised with it. It comes out very much in the ways it's things that we realize and we recognize as we get through life, as we compare our experiences to our brother's experiences, for example. Sometimes, like I said, something as simple as access to the masjid, access to scholarship, access to knowledge. It was very common. Alhamdulillah, this is changing now. I'm not going to say that we're still in the dark ages and there's no advancement and so on and so forth. MashaAllah, there is a lot of change, and I'm really happy to see it. And we do have more female scholarship, especially alhamdulillah, starting to become more well known. But in many parts of the world, even here in the enlightened West, as we like to say, it still happens where the women's section is small, it's crowded, it's dirty, it's unsafe, it's isolated. We don't have access to the imam easily. We don't have access to Islamic knowledge easily. When we do ask questions, if we are perceived as being too challenging, we are dismissed. We are quickly warned, don't listen to the kuffar. This is, shaitan is just trying to mislead you with these kafir ideologies, and why do you have these questions? And a woman could be coming in with these questions very sincerely and have not be thinking even about feminism at all, but thinking about, she read a hadith or was taught a hadith a certain way, and it is upsetting to her because she doesn't fully understand it. She doesn't know why she is being told to demean herself based on allegedly such and such a hadith. And it could be that this hadith is completely weak. I mean, I'm sure many of us have heard of the hadith that begins with, if anyone were commanded to do sajda, it would be a wife to her husband. And this is the second part that really jars people, and even if she were to lick the pus from his wounds, she would never be able to fulfill his rights. And the second part is completely inauthentic, it's rejected. But it is often taught as though it is part and parcel of an authentic narration, and it is used to tell women, like, you see, this is what you owe us. And no matter what you go through, you still owe us. And that's not what the Deen teaches at all. That is not how Islam deals with women. This is not how Allah and His Messenger ﷺ dealt with women and spoke to women and conceptualized women in their marital relationships or within the household dynamic in general. But this is what women are taught. This is what we are told. This is what we are made to believe about ourselves. And then when we want to ask questions, when you want to ask for clarification, when we want to ease our own spiritual well-being, we're told that we're being too aggressive. We're told that we're being brainwashed by the West. We're being told, how dare you question Islam? When these are perfectly valid questions to ask. It's okay to ask these questions. They should ask these questions to gain further clarification so that their iman can become stronger, not weaker.
Do you feel like these issues that Muslim women are facing in the current day and age, do you feel like it's only selective to Muslim women, like other faith groups, I don't know, like Jewish communities, Christian communities? Do you feel like those communities have similar issues to us, or is it just specifically tailored, it's specifically in regards to Muslim women?
No, I definitely think other faith groups also face the same challenges. And I've read about, Orthodox Jewish women who also identify as feminists, and much the same as my approach, actually, who are dedicated to their faith, who want to maintain the integrity of their faith and their religion and the laws of their religion, but cannot accept the way that women have been treated and the way women's roles have been conceptualized within their faith. So they definitely have very similar struggles and challenges, and it's certainly not unique to us. something that I heard Sheikh Muhammad Akram Nadwi say once that always stuck with me is that misogyny, sexism, hatred of women, or dealing with women in an oppressive manner is a part of Jahiliyyah that exists throughout all cultures and all societies and all religions, really. Unfortunately, while it is an aspect of Jahiliyyah that Islam came to eradicate and to change completely, it was something that within the time of Rasulullah and his companions and the Salaf immediately after, it was something they were aware of and that they did seek to change very much. But unfortunately, immediately after that, it was something that was never fully eradicated. Just like racism, to be honest.
Oh, interesting. So it's like something that's persisted throughout the history and different cultures, sort of thing.
Exactly. Yeah, and so it's something that has been maintained, and unfortunately, instead of actively working towards rejecting this and educating ourselves to reject it and educating ourselves to be more aware of and knowledgeable of the Quran and Sunnah and understanding the way that Rasulullah ﷺ and his companions understood it and practiced it, we seek to justify the sexism and misogyny instead with, again, allegedly Quran and Sunnah, which is so wrong. Like I said, it pushes people away from the Deen. Why would any woman want to stay Muslim if she is told that being a Muslim means that you are inferior? If being a Muslim means that you can't have a life or a role outside of wife and mother. If we are told that our place is solely within the home and we are not meant to leave the home, and a pious woman is a woman who is silent. I've had that line used on me before. Don't you know the most pious of women are those whose voices are never heard? What hadith is that? What hadith did you pull that out of?
That's interesting, but I just wanted to get a bit further into this issue of culture. Like, wouldn't you say that the struggles women face are sort of like what we face in the West is sort of completely different to what women in other Muslim countries would face, as in it's very culturally specific. Say in the West, Muslim women who are sort of like dissatisfied with what their imams and what men say about the religion, they can turn to sort of the wider society and like things like secular feminism, etc. As in they have that outlet as a rebellion against religion. Whereas in other countries, say in the Arab world or in the subcontinent, they sort of like they don't really have any of that recourse to something else. So, like, how would you counter that?
I think we do. I think we are kind of oblivious to the fact that women in Muslim countries are also accessing many of similar resources, even when it comes to secularism and secular feminism. They are turning to that. And unfortunately, I find that it's actually even more jarring. One thing that I personally find is that in the West, we at least have a concept of you can be Muslim, a conservative practicing Muslim even, and still have, broader horizons and be cognizant of other ideas and recognize the good that comes even from certain aspects of secularism. I don't want to say secularism really, but from Western society, whether it comes to, education or how women in
like
general
human
are.
rights and things like that.
Right, exactly.
Like wider concepts, yeah.
Exactly. So many of us who have been raised in the West, we don't necessarily see a huge contradiction. Like, yes, when it comes to certain issues like LGBTQ matters or, I don't know, abortion or whatever, popular buzzwords and debatable, controversial debates and topics like that, then yeah, it gets a little trickier, I guess you could say. But for us, these general women's rights and human rights are not necessarily alien to our idea of being Muslim. Whereas in some Muslim countries and some Muslim societies or certain aspects of those societies, you are either a very conservative Muslim who like fully buys into the cultural propaganda regarding women, and that's what makes you a religious, good Muslim woman, or if you reject any of that, that's it. You're liberal, you're proggy, and
True,
you're
so
out
it
of it.
becomes even harder for them, you could say, as in they're either like they fall into all the cultural problems along with the Islam, otherwise they're seen as a complete outcast, as in there's no possible.
Exactly. So either you're a secular feminist and liberal who fights for human rights, or you're a conservative Muslim who upholds the oppression of not just women, but many
Yeah,
different
definitely.
aspects of society.
In regards to you made the comparison of what women are going through in today's kind of day and age. I actually wanted to kind of dissect that and also compare it to the women of Rasul's time, because we get because okay, so us, Muslims living in this century, our kind of point of reference is, Rasul's time, whether it be through companion Sahaba and mother of the believers and the pious women that lived at that time. However, to kind of hone in on the women of the Prophet Muhammad's time, I want to compare the freedoms that they had at that time and the freedom that Muslim women have now. So, however, the term freedom is also can be defined so differently. So, I wanted to, before actually delve into the, if they had freedom and whatnot from this time, comparing it back in those times, I want to define, what would you say define to be as freedom? What does it mean to have freedom, especially in the context of Muslim women?
That's such a deep philosophical topic that I don't feel quite equipped to go into detail about. But in a nutshell, I would say that for us as Muslims, our concept of freedom is, of course, limited in many ways, because for us, we are reminded constantly of the limits that Allah has placed upon us in the Quran and Sunnah. And Allah tells us in the Quran, in many different verses, warns us about those who transgress against His limits and His boundaries. So the concept of unlimited freedom does not exist for us as Muslims, and I think that's simply just a fact, and something that hopefully most of us do not disagree with, and we submit to the limits that Allah has placed upon us. So when we talk about
Yeah, that's something else. Like, sorry, like you mentioned the whole the philosophical kind of depth of the term freedom, and it's funny. It's how the society that we've basically lived in. We define freedom to be more happy, like, or just you're not buckled down. You're more liberated, and it's championed, so it's seen as a good thing. Like, the more things you get to do, the more options you have on the table, the better it is.
Yeah, so like I think like in the West, when we think of freedom, it's like a liberal idea of freedom, as in being sort of unchecked by any other parameters besides your own free will. Like, I can do what I want and I'm not accountable to anyone. So what we think of freedom is very different to the sense in which the women of the Prophet ﷺ's time were free to go about their ways and pursue whatever they wanted, sort of their careers, things like that.
Well, we're talking, like I said, about freedom within an Islamic context, is recognizing that we are all constrained by certain basic limits and boundaries that we are all bound by.
Yeah.
The well-known rules of the Sharia, right? So within that framework, I would say that the freedom that the woman at the time of Rasulullah ﷺ had is something that we are only now starting to remember and recognize. And I'm talking about not just a lot of us like to talk about, Sahabiyat who used to work and they had what we would call careers today, whether it was entrepreneurship, they had their own businesses, they were tradeswomen, they were craftswomen, whatever it may be. Is not just in that sense, though. They had what I call, they had intellectual freedom as well, and they had the freedom to be a recognized part of society and to be included in Islamic society, in the prophetic society of Mecca and Medina. Women were never excluded from taking part in even something like jihad, which we tend to think of as a very male field, I suppose you could say. It is an obligation upon men and not upon women. And yet we have women like Ka'b radiallahu anha, who was right there at the Battle of Uhud, defending the Messenger of Allah sallam, from every way. She picked up a shield, she picked up a sword, and she fought. And not only during his lifetime, but after his lifetime as well, she joined the Muslim army to fight against the false prophets, against Musaylim al-Kadhab. Nobody told her, hey, you know what? Just leave this to the men. This is their job. You're a woman, you're a wife, you're a mother, stay home, take care of your family. This is a man's work. They recognized that she had the choice. And they did not argue with her, and they did not contest this in any way, shape, or form. We had women like Rufayda al-Aslamiyya, who was a doctor, basically, and she erected a hospital tent in the masjid of Rasulullah sallallahu. And nobody told her, oh, God, you're a woman, how dare you, you're mingling with men and you're treating men, and it's not appropriate for you as a Muslim woman to be this physically close with them. It was recognized that she had a valuable skill, a necessary skill, a skill that was saving the lives of people, of men and women and children. And she was commended for that. And she was provided that opportunity. Nobody, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, never kicked her out of the masjid or told her that she should only treat women or that she should only be a gynecologist.
That's a contemporary example of women being forced into certain roles. Yeah. So pretty much
Right.
what you're saying is that what you're saying is that women in Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's time had the opportunity to assert themselves in wider society in a way which we don't have right now.
Very much so. And when women are asserting themselves now, it's with all these caveats and these guilt trips and this whole, you're not being a very pious Muslim woman. If you were really pious, you would just stay home and, have kids and homeschool them and make them off hafad and, the end. And I have nothing against, staying home or homeschooling or raising children to be hafad. Those are all very noble things. But women were given the choice, and they were not told that to be a pious Muslim woman means to be a very certain type of woman, a cookie cutter, ideal Muslimah, Stepford wife prototype.
Yeah.
That concept was not there the way that it is now.
So these caveats and this baggage that sort of follows women around in like the pursuit to be a better Muslim, like as in, would you say this is all not a part of Islam, more so just cultural, like a cultural Islam that's followed us around that we can't get rid of?
Absolutely. I believe that it is very cultural, but I also believe that unfortunately there are those who are invested in the idea of keeping women restricted and limited in ways that they were not at the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And yet, like I said, the most dangerous thing is when they use ayat or hadith out of context or partially translated or partially interpreted to push this very limited and restricted narrative. And that's why I am very much invested in being able to clarify for Muslim women the actual context of what these hadith and ayat are, what they actually meant. How was it understood at the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam? Was the understanding of those ayat and hadith practiced then the way that we claim it should be practiced now?
Yeah.
So, like you were basically mentioning back then, and all these great examples. My kind of query or question would be, then what happened? Because if they did it back in the past, and we have Islam, and Islam was kind of spreading to other countries, and people were accepting Islam. Times passed, and we had the Ottoman Empire, etc., etc. And then we're in this, we're living now, and suddenly you don't have the perception of women that the Sahaba had. It's completely different now. So what do you think happened? Like, what went wrong for people, basically?
I think it was honestly as simple as people didn't like that women had these Islamic freedoms, and so they basically just regressed back to the misogyny and the sexism of Jahiliyyah, and they just covered it, like I said, with Islamic justifications, and they just went back to, in many ways, the practices that used to exist before. And I know there are some people who say that there was a lot of influence from Greek philosophers and ideas at that time, and their conceptualization of women as being inferior in animal and so on and so forth. And I don't doubt that all those things had an influence on the overall Muslim mentality. Like I said, though, I don't like to blame everything 100% on the kuffar, either of the past or the present, because we are very much responsible for our own state. We are responsible for how we are. So I would say that we went wrong pretty early on. Like Sheikh Akram mentioned that, after the first 3-4 generations of the Sahaba and the Salaf and the very early scholars, female scholarship itself, it didn't completely disappear, but it became far more restricted and far more limited.
So would you say that's the Jahiliyyah sort of like reasserting itself or coming back in the Muslim community after the pious sort of generations had passed on? and that now it's sort
Absolutely.
of like those sort of attitudes against women are sort of being perpetuated by Muslims themselves, like Muslim men and people like men in positions of scholarship. As in, what you're pretty much saying is patriarchy. Like, I wouldn't want to
Yeah,
use that word, but
basically.
pretty much that's what feminists would
Yeah,
say. As in, that's the structure that sort of persists that makes it so hard for
absolutely.
women.
That's
But would you use
100%
the word
that.
patriarchy, or would you say like more so just attitudes?
I do use the word patriarchy. I do use it, and I think it's a very apt term for, like I said, the structures that do exist that have perpetuated these things. I will say though that contrary to what many people think, that patriarchy is just men saying these things and perpetuating these things, I will also say that women participate in misogyny and patriarchy as well. Many of us have been taught, before being taught by any imam, but by the aunties in our families, in our cultures. The aunties are the ones who perpetuate these things. A good girl is quiet. A good girl doesn't ask too many questions. Be a good girl. That kind of, again, cultural mentality. The double standards, the enabling of men. I think it's like, probably all of us recognize the whole stereotype of the double standard, where an auntie will favor her son and not even let him like pour himself a glass of water, while she expects her daughter to be cooking and cleaning for the entire family, you know. And boys have no curfew and they can go out and do whatever. So yeah, women do participate and perpetuate
Just
misogyny
as
and
a totally
patriarchy as
separate
well.
point, this made me think of just with Malcolm X. I know it's completely unrelated, but in race, there's the field Negro and the house Negro, as in your own kind can sort of perpetuate your oppression. Yeah,
The
exactly.
Uncle
So is
Tom.
that sort of what you're talking about? As in women themselves
Yeah, completely.
monitor other women and make it hard for them?
Absolutely, 100%.
That also reminds me of there's a local Sheikh, he's Sheikh Abu Adnan. So yeah, I was studying Medina University and stuff, and he's doing great work in Sydney. He's very popular Sheikh here. He was in the Dawah field as well, and so he did a khutbah. It wasn't too long ago, and he mentioned he actually like it's a new theme to kind of address Muslim women and what they're going through. And he mentioned that he basically literally did it only about Muslim having daughters and raising them right. And he mentions what you're talking about, basically how we are telling them to be one kind of type of person. So like, don't ask too many questions and don't ask why. You're giving, the brother more things to do and the girls less, stuff like that. And what actually happens, he brought the whole realism into it. He said that by forcing your daughter to be in one way, which is, don't ask too many questions, be quiet all the time and this, that, and only clean dishes and don't play sport or whatever. What happens is that her true self, so what is really inside of her personality, everything is suppressed. Okay, so every time you're at home, you're not yourself. But then what happens is you have to have that release somewhere, either through friends, maybe other family who can relate to you some way. But the thing is, the very dangerous thing is, since we are in this society, right? We have technology, low key, maybe at night, it will lead them to do haram. It will make them like maybe if they can bond with another Muslim girl who might
Absolutely.
go through the same, that might be one instance of things not going too wrong. But however, if there's a guy, or what if a guy shows interest in her and this, that, or what if, it could be any other person who can take advantage of her in that situation because they know basically about who she is. It's so dangerous that it's brushed aside, and we don't think about it in that level. It's about, and then he emphasized that, look, make sure your daughter is who she is around you. That means that regardless of if she talks over you, obviously, like, later down the line she'll learn to respect you, not by you forcing her to not talk over you. Get me? So there's two aspects to it. She'll learn to respect you in that manner. She'll learn to come to you and tell her all about what she's going through. It's about creating that bond, and obviously it reflects on what Rasul Sallam did. It's very simple reading of the seerah. You'll know, like, about how he basically treated his wives, his daughters. You know what I mean? So it's sad that that aspect is not emphasized enough in the
Yeah,
community.
absolutely.
And that's why I really liked when Sheikh Abu Adnan addressed it in front of basically males, just talking about females, how you approach them. Because obviously it'll hit hard on some dads who are very strict in that manner. So it's something in the community that, even that khutbah made me open my eyes up a bit and made sure that, because I have a younger sister, that she is always who she is around me and my parents, regardless of, maybe my mom or my parents might get angry here and there, but always make sure she's herself around us, because it saves, it protects her and makes her not fall into sin. You get me? So yeah, and she'll be able to develop as a human being instead of not, being scared to basically confront her parents, right? You don't want that thing to happen in the family, especially a Muslim family. And we're already finding it tough as it is living in the Western society, dealing with, going to school and everyone, there's alcohol, whatnot, and all this stuff you have to deal with as it is. You don't want your emotional personality kind of side to be ruined as well in the process.
Exactly.
It just adds more to what we're going through.
Oh, for sure, for sure. And it's something that so many Muslim women, Muslim girls, my age, younger, older, that we can all relate to. And I do want to add, Jazakallah khair for sharing that the Sheikh gave that khutbah, because that is something that is so important to highlight these kinds of khutab and these shuyukh who are aware of these things and who are speaking about them and who are really bringing about positive change, because women's rights are not just women's issues. Women's rights are human rights and human issues, and they are a very Muslim issue that affects men just as much as it affects women in many different ways. And it can affect men spiritually as well. In the akhirah, as we know from the hadith, كلكم راع وكلكم مسؤول عن رعيته. Each of you is a shepherd, each of you is responsible for their flock. So the Muslim men are responsible for their flock, for their daughters, and they're responsible for raising them correctly. And there's the extreme of being too liberal, for sure, and that's what a lot of people have focused on so much. But there's definitely the extreme of being conservative in a way that is not healthy, even from an Islamic, spiritual, and holistic manner. And so these shuyukh, these du'at, their work is much, much, much appreciated, because there are many men who will simply refuse to hear the exact same information, the exact same advice, the exact same ayat and examples from the seerah. They'll just flat out refuse to accept it from a woman. But for Muslim men who have that level of authority and who have that platform, for them to speak up and for them to really bring about that change within their communities, one khutbah at a time, halaqah at a time, one counseling session at a time, one personal interaction at a time, that is really what will contribute to strong, positive change when it comes to women's issues in the Muslim community. And that is hugely, hugely appreciated.
Yeah, it's definitely a conversation that must be had amongst Muslim communities, and it should be more readily available, to have it, discussion panels or as such, and get more Muslim women's voices into this whole conversation. But overall, Jazakallah khair for coming on, Zainab, today. Like, we really appreciate you came on Boys in the Cave. We were actually we only see you as that person who writes on Facebook and blogging. So it was I think you've done podcasts like a few before, but you're primarily just online writing. And so that kind of, we really appreciate you coming on Boys in the Cave, because we are pretty new onto the scene. So
Yeah.
No, Jazakallah khair for contacting me and for having this conversation. I really appreciate it and I enjoyed it. And I feel that an advantage to podcasts is that I can talk about certain things that I generally don't deliberately talk about online. So I might actually come off as more conservative in a discussion like this than I do when I'm writing and blogging every day.
Yeah, it's hard to get the full picture of what you're about unless we were able to ask you in more detail about your stances on certain things, like your name, why you chose it, and it just makes a lot more sense than what comes off on your social media and your Facebook posts. So it's great to have that. Thank you so much.
Barakallahu feek. Time.
Sorry, I think from what I get, right, you're obviously niqabi, right? And it's funny, it's that how we from Western or even non-Muslims, they think of niqabis as not voicing opinions in that way and whatnot. And even doing a podcast shows that Muslim women in general are just like normal, right? And they're just as down to earth or cool or banter and whatnot. You know what I mean? And it's also that whole idea that we need to combat in the current society that we live in as well. So that's why it was great having you on board, especially. Yeah.
Just before we conclude, I wanted to ask, what's with your display picture? The whole the leather and the bike. As in, is that something you actually do, or it's more so just the motif?
No, so when I came up with that, this was way before I was popular online. I just did something fun for my blog, and I was like, I want something really cool. So the sword, for example, is something that I've always been into since I was a kid. Just shiny objects that are very sharp. And
Okay.
I've always wanted a sword. I can't have one in real life. I've got too many kids. It's a bit of a dangerous
It's like
hazard.
full freedom woman, like jihad, taking you to the next level.
Like you're saying just then about the women who jihad, it's crazy.
It's the whole thing. Even like the motorcycle. I've always been into motorcycles since I was a kid. So it's kind of like if I were to live on the internet as a real person, that is what I would be. But in real life, I'm really just a
It's
mom.
really cool. It gives you that edge. I think just sort of your artistic and everything. Yeah.
I didn't. Full disclaimer: I didn't draw that myself. I just came up with the ideas and I hired
That's cool.
an artist at that.
But anyways, thank you so much for your time. Inshallah, may Allah bless you for your future works, and we're looking to keep in touch, inshallah, for future works or projects or episodes. So yeah.
Absolutely, inshallah.
For our listeners, thank you so much for giving us your attention. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to email us at boysinthecave@gmail.com or find us on Facebook. And you can also follow our journey through Instagram and Twitter. We're young Muslim uni students just based out in Sydney, Australia. So if you want to help us or want to help us continue improving our content, support us by becoming a Patreon today. So go on patreon.com/boysinthecave and you can donate about $5 a month, inshallah. Please leave a 5-star rating on iTunes. That greatly helps us. Please, support us in any way, shape you can, whether you can share our content online or to following us on social media, to telling your friends and family about us. iTunes is really important because it basically helps us go up the rankings. And as I tell my boys here, we want to grow more. So I'm certain we can do it through the help of Allah, inshallah. So from our special guest, the Salafi Feminist, aka, I keep saying that, Zainab, Binti Yunus, aka the Salafi Feminist, and myself and Josh, we wish you all the best. This is Tanzim signing you off. Assalamu alaikum.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم وربطنا على قلوبهم إذ قاموا فقالوا ربنا رب السماوات والأرض لن ندعو من دونه إلها لقد قلنا إذا شططا هؤلاء قومنا اتخذوا من دونه آلهة لولا يأتون عليهم بسلطان بين فمن أظلم ممن افترى على الله كذبا